You've already heard a brief introduction to the Battle of Verdun. Again, before I start, let I say sources in English, and my French is appalling, sources in English on Verdun are limited. Sources in English on the artillery at Verdun are very limited. In the French official histories, there are 5 volumes on Verdun, probably close to 500,000 words. Didn't help me a lot. Okay. The Battle for Verdun was fought between the 21st of February and the 18th of December 1916, and it was the longest continuous battle of the Great War. It was also a battle planned for and decided by artillery. The architect of Verdun, the German Commander-in-Chief, Erich von Falkenhayn, he's the handsome young chap on your left, conceived the battle as an attritional struggle in which German superiority in artillery would enable him to destroy the core of the French army without actually having to waste his infantry resources. Chosen for its emotional significance for the French nation, Falkenhayn reasoned that France would continue to feed troops into and defend Verdun despite whatever losses were experienced. In this, his reasoning was sound, as the French Commander-in-Chief, General Joseph Joffre, the somewhat less handsome chap on the right, known affectionately as Papa Joffre, reflected political and national sentiment and was forced to defend Verdun, almost whatever the cost. The German offensive caught the French at a moment of doctrinal indecision over how to defend against an attack from a modern, well-armed and well-trained foe. 2 years of war had forced some bitter lessons on the French. Their pre-war doctrine of attaque à outrance, or mean attack with everything, and their belief that morale will outweigh materiel did not survive the opening rounds of the war. French pre-war artillery doctrine, which reflected this dominant theory, was all about manoeuvre and manoeuvrability. Guns were purely to support the infantry in their attack, and therefore had to be light enough to keep up with a manoeuvring force. The invention of the French superb 75mm field gun, the 75, in 1897 seemed to satisfy all future artillery needs for the French field army. Even when alerted to German developments of larger calibre field pieces, the 105 and the 155, French artillery experts were confident that the higher rate of fire of their 75 would overcome the German advantages in both range and shell weight. These assumptions were quickly proved wrong. In late 1915, Joffre initiated a crash program to design and produce suitable heavy guns to bridge the gap, but this took time. The only short-term remedy available to the French was for the heavy artillery to be stripped from fortresses and whatever other fortified field positions they could and reassigned to the field army. The fortress at Verdun was stripped. I have a better map of Verdun in a minute, but that's you can see Verdun, and around it you can see the fortresses there, those funny little sort of black diamond shapes. In view of the second great lesson for the French from the first 2 years of war, this was not an unpalatable conclusion, this taking of heavy guns from stationary positions, from fixed positions. Joffre had quickly come to the conclusion that fortresses were no longer viable in the face of modern heavy artillery. And this was based on his observation of what happened to the forts at Liège in Belgium and Przemysl in Austria-Hungary. In late 1915, he ordered the removal of 237 guns from the Verdun fortress link chain and 657 tons of ammunition. Many of the fortresses were abandoned, several being prepared for destruction, in fact. And he demanded that instead of a interlocking fortress system, he replaced that with a linear defence based on trenches and barbed wire. More importantly, he reduced the manpower in the fortress to such an extent that few of the guns that were left could be operated. Now, despite that, and despite what I've just said, there were still plenty of guns left in the forts, about 300 barrels in all, mainly twin 75s and old 155s, but they were in turrets and they couldn't be easily removed, which is why they survived. However, not just the utility of the fortresses was a problem for Joffre and the field commanders. The forts were under the command not of the local field commander, but of military headquarters, fortification military headquarters in Paris. General Chrétien, the 30 Corps commander who was responsible for the defence of the north and northeastern sector of Verdun, where those German red lines are, he was opposite them, tried to check out the state of the forts and was denied entry to Fort Douaumont. because they weren't in his chain of command. The difficulties of coordinating integrated artillery plan were thus severely compromised by these complex command arrangements. This is a better map showing you the fortresses around Verdun. When on the 21st of February the German offensive began, the French found themselves seriously outgunned in a defensive position that was neither fortress nor field defence, and in the 10-hour German barrage by over 1,200 guns, they were completely overwhelmed. The Germans naturally had tailored their artillery resources to their plan. There were 26 super heavy guns, including a number of 420mm railguns. Do you know how big 420mm is? It's quite large. Specifically designed to deal with the forts at Verdun and Verdun itself. Quick digression, Verdun had been a fortress designed back in the 17th century, and it had a classic Vauban fortress right in the middle of the town, right on top of the hill. And if ever you get there, it's still worth visiting. It's been smashed around, but it's still a very imposing bit of military architecture from the 18th century. The infantry attack began at 1600, and using frightful new weapons like flamethrowers for the first time, and new infiltration tactics, this is the early stormtrooper tactic, they quickly overran French positions. In the first day, they advanced 5 kilometres and suffered an estimated 600 casualties in their infantry. For the next few days, further advances were made, but inevitably French resistance began to harden. French morale, however, suffered a severe blow when Fort Douaumont fell on the 25th of February. Fort Douaumont was an emotional, it had come out of the battles of Valmy back in the time of the French Revolution, and it was an emotional location for the French population. As the advance slowed and the French regrouped, the Germans found themselves at a tactical disadvantage. German operational planners had made a major error in initially only advancing down the eastern side of the Meuse, which is down, what have I done? I wanted where it is. Where's the, I'm trying to hit the red button, but it's very close. Okay, they came down this way. As you can see, the Germans have forts over here, so when they get to about here, the French guns on the other bank, including a number of old forts, they'd had a number of old 155mm, and despite the fact they're old, they're still effective when they're firing enfilade into your flanks. We're in a position to fire in and do large mass decimation amongst the advancing infantry. And more importantly, though, they also counter-batteried German guns advancing in support, and even more importantly, they interdicted German supply, particularly first line. This then forced the Germans to launch a series of attacks to clear the eastern bank, but by now, because operational surprise had been lost, they only achieved limited success and at a huge cost. As for the French, most German casualties were caused by the French artillery. This was no accident. Fortunately, for the French that is, a new commander was appointed at Verdun at the end of February. I have got a photo of him, I should have. General Philippe Pétain was an infantryman, but he understood artillery. He'd actually put his career on the line pre-war by opposing this stupid attaque à l'outrance and was saying, guns kill, guns kill. And he was under a cloud. When the war happened and he was proved right, he was quickly promoted. He understood the need for coordination, effective and reliable logistics, and most importantly, for the artillery to regain the trust of their infantry. Pétain immediately implemented a number of critical changes. Some were obvious, such as repairing the supply system, but others were, quote, courageous, such as telling GQG, which is the French National Headquarters, to stop sending infantry to Verdun, but send heavy artillery instead. Pétain set about restoring the infantry's confidence in their guns by micromanaging how the artillery performed. He personally reviewed every day's artillery program and personally ensured that the guns were delivering the requested support. He used to check with the infantry that they were happy with the support they were getting. Later on, he reorganised the field artillery itself, giving divisions more organic medium artillery and grouping heavy guns, howitzers and heavy mortars at corps and army level so that they could bring effective fire on critical points. He later increased the number of artillery regiments in the French army from 115 to 247. And finally, he recognised the importance of aircraft with spotting for artillery. So, to ensure that his spotter aircraft could operate unimpeded, he organised the world's first fighter squadrons ever to protect Verdun, and it paid off. In February, the Germans had air superiority. From June, they lost it totally from then to the end of the battle. When properly coordinated and resourced, the fortress guns on both sides of the Meuse gave a very good account of themselves. It's often forgotten in the histrionics about Verdun that only 2 forts actually fell. The rest functioned, and when reinforced and supplied, functioned very well. These were the emotional heart of the artillery resistance, but it is also important to remember that by about June, the French had rallied their field forces and a large amount of artillery was massing on the western flank behind the western flank of the French lines. So they had Army Group Centre equivalent worth of artillery in support from June on. And now Verdun was a tragedy for France, but was the catalyst for modernising both the French army's attitude towards and understanding of artillery in a balanced army. By the end of 1916, French artillery was almost on a par technically with their German opponents in the field, and by 1918, French artillery was a serious arm of war. Thank you. That's it. That's my 10 minutes.